The morning sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, illuminating the bustling Terminal 3 with an almost magical glow. 12-year-old Emma Martinez clutched her brand-new carry-on suitcase, a birthday gift adorned with tiny airplane decals she'd carefully placed herself, and practically vibrated with excitement. Her dark brown eyes, so much like her father's, scanned every detail of the airport with the intensity of someone who'd spent their entire childhood dreaming of aviation. "Mom, look, that's a Boeing 787 Dreamliner." Emma pointed toward the massive aircraft visible through the terminal windows, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm that made several nearby travelers smile. Sarah Martinez laughed, adjusting her purse on her shoulder as she guided her daughter through the security checkpoint. "Sweetheart, you've been identifying planes since you were 6. I swear you know more about aircraft than I know about anything." Emma beamed with pride. It was true. While other kids her age obsessed over social media influencers or video games, Emma had spent countless hours studying aviation. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of commercial jets, her bookshelf crammed with pilot memoirs and aeronautical engineering textbooks that were technically meant for high school students. Her father, Captain David Martinez, had fostered this passion since she was old enough to understand what he did for a living. Captain Martinez was something of a legend in aviation circles. With over 20 years of experience flying for Atlanticair, one of the nation's most prestigious carriers, he'd logged more than 15,000 flight hours and had an impeccable safety record. He'd flown through hurricanes, navigated emergency landings, and had once been featured in Aviation Weekly for his exceptional crisis management during a mid-flight mechanical failure. Emma worshipped him, and her greatest dream was to someday sit in a cockpit beside him, matching his skill and composure. Today was special for another reason beyond Emma's birthday. Sarah had secretly saved for months to afford first-class tickets on Skyward Airlines, a smaller but growing carrier known for its competitive prices. David had offered to use his employee benefits to get them free tickets on Atlanticair, but Sarah wanted this to be her gift. She wanted Emma to experience the luxury of first class, to feel like the important young woman she was becoming. Boarding Group 1 for Flight 447 to Los Angeles. The gate agent's voice crackled through the speakers. Emma's heart raced. "That's us, Mom, first-class boards first." They walked down the jet bridge, and Emma's excitement reached a fever pitch when she stepped onto the Boeing 777. The first-class cabin was stunning. Wide leather seats the color of cream, ambient lighting that gave everything a warm glow, and enough legroom to stretch out completely. Their seats were 2A and 2B, right at the front of the cabin. "Mom, this is incredible," Emma whispered, running her hand along the leather armrest. She carefully stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment, a backpack containing her father's old flight manual, her journal where she documented every flight she'd ever taken, and a laminated checklist of pre-flight procedures David had made for her years ago. As passengers continued boarding, a flight attendant approached with a warm, professional smile. Janet Walsh was a woman in her mid-40s, with strawberry blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the crisp navy blue uniform of Skyward Airlines. Her name tag gleamed under the cabin lights, and she carried herself with the confident air of someone who'd been doing this job for a long time. "Good morning, ladies," Janet said pleasantly, her voice smooth and practiced. "Welcome to first class. Is this your first time flying with us?" Sarah nodded. "It is. We're celebrating my daughter's 12th birthday." Janet's smile widened genuinely. "Well, happy birthday, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Emma," she replied, sitting up straighter in her seat. "Emma Martinez. My dad's a pilot. He flies for Atlanticair." "Oh, a pilot's daughter. That's wonderful," Janet said. "Then you probably know more about this aircraft than I do." She winked, and Emma giggled. "I'll make sure we bring you something special once we're in the air. How does chocolate cake sound?" "That sounds amazing." Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, and even the businessman across the aisle chuckled at her joy. As Janet moved down the aisle to greet other passengers, Sarah leaned over and squeezed Emma's hand. "This is going to be a perfect trip, sweetheart. Just you and me in California for the weekend. Shopping, the beach, maybe even Disneyland if we have time." Emma squeezed back, her heart full. "Thanks, Mom. This is already the best birthday ever." The plane began to push back from the gate, and Emma watched with rapt attention as the ground crew guided them out. She could see the pilots through the slightly open cockpit door, two figures in white shirts with black epaulets, running through their pre-flight checks with practiced precision. She imagined herself there someday, hands steady on the controls, responsible for hundreds of lives. The engines roared to life with that distinctive whine that Emma had loved since she was a toddler. The plane taxied toward the runway, and she pressed her face against the window, watching other aircraft pass by. A FedEx cargo plane, a Southwest 737, a tiny private jet that looked like a toy compared to their massive Boeing. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." The captain's voice came through the intercom, calm, authoritative, reassuring. Janet Walsh walked through the cabin one final time, checking seat belts and ensuring overhead bins were secured. She smiled at Emma again as she passed. Everything was perfect. Everything was safe. The engines throttled up and the massive aircraft began its takeoff roll. Emma felt the familiar press of acceleration against her back, watched the ground blur past, and then, that magical moment, they lifted into the sky. She was flying. She was home. As the Boeing 777 climbed through the clouds and leveled off at 35,000 feet, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began shifting in their seats, pulling out laptops and tablets. Janet emerged from the galley with a beverage cart, ready to begin first-class service. Emma had no idea that in less than 1 hour her perfect day would become a nightmare that would change her life and the entire airline industry, forever. 45 minutes into the flight, Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned toward her mother. "Mom, I need to use the restroom." Sarah glanced up from her magazine. "Of course, honey. Be careful in there. You know how small airplane bathrooms are." Emma smiled and stood up, steadying herself against the slight turbulence. The first-class cabin was quiet and peaceful. Most passengers were absorbed in their own worlds. The businessman across the aisle typed furiously on his laptop. An elderly couple too rose back, dozed contentedly, and a young woman near the galley scrolled through her phone. Janet Walsh was in the forward galley, preparing the meal service with another flight attendant, a younger man named Marcus. Emma made her way to the lavatory, her movements careful and practiced. She'd been on dozens of flights with her father, and he'd taught her all the unwritten rules of air travel. Be courteous, don't linger in the aisle, always be aware of your surroundings. She used the restroom quickly, washed her hands, and checked her reflection in the tiny mirror. Her dark hair was slightly messy from leaning against the window, and she smoothed it down before stepping back into the cabin. What Emma didn't see, what no passenger could see, was the storm brewing behind Janet Walsh's professional facade. Janet had been awake for 32 hours straight. Her original shift had ended yesterday afternoon, but Skyward Airlines had called her at 11 p.m., desperately short-staffed, begging her to take this Chicago to LA route. She'd said yes because she needed the money. Her son's college tuition was due. Her ex-husband was behind on support payments, and Skyward's recent policy changes meant fewer opportunities for overtime pay. She'd taken caffeine pills to stay alert, but they were wearing off. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged meal trays. Her head pounded with a migraine that felt like someone was driving nails into her skull. And beneath the exhaustion was something darker, a deep, simmering resentment toward the airline that worked her to the bone while cutting benefits and increasing demands. Marcus noticed her unsteady movements. "Janet, you okay? You look pretty rough." "I'm fine," she snapped, more harshly than intended. "Just focus on your own work." Emma emerged from the lavatory and began walking back to her seat. The aisle was narrow, and Janet had positioned the beverage cart at an angle while organizing supplies. Emma tried to squeeze past carefully, but her backpack, slung over one shoulder, grazed the cart's edge. A single bottle of sparkling water wobbled, teetered, and then fell onto the cart's lower shelf with a soft thud. Nothing broke. Nothing spilled. It was the kind of minor bump that happened 100 times on every flight. But for Janet Walsh, something inside her snapped. The exhaustion, the financial stress, the years of swallowing her frustration with impossible schedules and diminishing respect, it all converged in that single moment. She whirled around, her face contorted with sudden, explosive rage that seemed to come from nowhere. "You clumsy little brat." Janet's voice was a vicious snarl that cut through the cabin's peaceful atmosphere like a knife. "Can't you watch where you're going?" Emma froze, her eyes wide with shock. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "Sorry, sorry." Janet's hand shot out like a striking snake, her fingers clamping around Emma's left forearm with brutal force. "Let me teach you to be more careful." What happened next took less than 2 seconds, but would replay in Emma's nightmares for years to come. Janet yanked Emma's arm sideways with shocking violence, twisting and pulling with all the strength of her exhaustion-fueled rage. Emma's body was thrown off balance, her arm wrenched at an angle that human bones were never meant to endure. The sound, that sickening crack, was like a tree branch snapping in a winter storm. It echoed through the cabin with horrible clarity. Emma's scream was primal, a sound of pure agony that made every passenger's blood run cold. It was the kind of scream that reached into people's chests and squeezed their hearts. Her face went white, then red, her mouth open in a perfect circle of shock and pain. Tears erupted from her eyes instantly. The cabin exploded into chaos. "Oh my God!" Sarah shot out of her seat like she'd been launched, her magazine flying across the aisle. "Emma, Emma!" The businessman ripped off his headphones and jumped up, his laptop clattering to the floor. "What the hell did you just do?" "I saw that. She grabbed that child." The elderly woman shouted, her husband already reaching for his phone to record. Marcus dropped the tray he was holding, his face a mask of horror. "Janet, what?" Emma collapsed to her knees, cradling her left arm against her chest. It hung at a grotesque, impossible angle just below the elbow, the bone clearly broken. Her arm was already beginning to swell, the skin turning an angry purple red. She sobbed uncontrollably, her whole body shaking with pain and terror. Sarah reached her daughter and dropped to the floor beside her, gathering Emma into her arms as carefully as possible. "Baby, oh baby, I've got you, I've got you." Her own face was streaked with tears, her voice breaking. "Someone help her, someone help my daughter." Janet stumbled backward, the rage draining from her face and being replaced by dawning horror. Her hands started to shake violently. She fell. The plane hit turbulence. She must have. "Liar!" The businessman stepped forward, his finger jabbing toward Janet. "I saw the whole thing. You grabbed her and yanked her arm. There was no turbulence." "I'm recording this," the elderly woman said, her phone aimed at Janet. "You attacked that child. We all saw it." A doctor from business class pushed through the gathering crowd. "I'm a physician. Let me through." He knelt beside Emma, his face grave as he examined her arm without touching it. "This is a serious fracture. We need to immobilize this immediately." The cockpit door burst open, and the first officer rushed out. "What's happening back here?" "That flight attendant just broke a little girl's arm." Multiple voices shouted simultaneously. Emma's sobs had dissolved into a continuous, keening whine of pain. Her eyes were unfocused, her breathing rapid and shallow. She was going into shock. Sarah looked up at the first officer, her face contorted with anguish and fury. "That woman attacked my daughter. She broke her arm, and I want this plane on the ground now." The first officer's face went pale as he took in the scene. The obviously broken arm, the sobbing child, the hostile passengers, and Janet Walsh standing frozen with her hands over her mouth, whispering, "No, no, no, no," over and over. He pulled out his radio. "Captain, we have a serious medical emergency in first class. A passenger has a severe arm fracture. Request immediate guidance." The captain's voice crackled back, tight with tension. "How severe?" The doctor looked up grimly. "Tell him this child needs surgery as soon as possible. Every minute counts." Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed her husband's number. When David answered, cheerful and unsuspecting, she could barely form the words. "David, something terrible has happened to Emma, a flight attendant. She attacked her. Her arm is broken. We're still in the air. Please, please, we need you." In that moment, 35,000 feet above the American heartland, a perfect birthday trip had become a nightmare that would shake an entire industry to its foundations. Captain Richard Brennan had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years, but the tremor in his first officer's voice made his stomach drop. "Captain, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." "Talk to me, Chris." "A 12-year-old passenger has a compound fracture of the left arm. One of our flight attendants is allegedly responsible. The cabin is. It's chaos back there, sir. Passengers are demanding we land immediately." Brennan's jaw tightened. He glanced at his instruments, calculating rapidly. They were 87 minutes from Los Angeles, currently over Kansas. The nearest suitable airport was Denver, 42 minutes away. He keyed the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We are aware of a medical emergency in the first-class cabin. Please remain calm and seated while our crew provides assistance. I will update you shortly." In the cabin, the doctor, Dr. Raymond Chen, an orthopedic surgeon returning from a conference, worked quickly despite the limited resources. "I need magazines, rigid materials, anything we can use as a splint." His voice was calm but urgent. Marcus, the other flight attendant, rushed to gather materials while Janet remained frozen against the galley wall, her face the color of ash. Emma's screams had subsided into broken whimpers. The pain was so intense that her body seemed to be shutting down, seeking escape through unconsciousness. Sarah held her daughter's good hand, pressing her forehead against Emma's, whispering desperate reassurances. "Daddy's coming, baby. Daddy will fix this. Just hold on, please hold on." Dr. Chen gently examined the injury without touching it, his experienced eyes taking in the swelling, the angle, the discoloration. "This is a displaced fracture of the radius and ulna, both bones in the forearm. I can see bone displacement through the swelling." He looked up at Sarah. "Your daughter is going to need immediate surgical intervention, open reduction and internal fixation. They'll need to realign the bones and insert pins or plates." Sarah's sob caught in her throat. Will her arm?" "She'll recover, but this is serious. Every minute matters." Dr. Chen began carefully immobilizing Emma's arm using rolled magazines and strips of cloth torn from blankets. Each tiny movement made Emma cry out, breaking Sarah's heart into smaller pieces. The businessman who'd witnessed everything, Thomas Garrett, a corporate attorney from Boston, was already documenting everything with military precision. He'd taken photos of Emma's injury, video of Janet's attempts to explain herself, and was now collecting contact information from witnesses. 4 passengers in first class had seen the entire incident clearly. "I'm writing down everything," Thomas told Sarah quietly. "Time stamps, witness names, everything. That woman won't get away with this." Janet finally found her voice, pushing away from the galley wall. Her hands shook as she approached, tears streaming down her face. "It was an accident. The plane hit turbulence and she lost her balance. I tried to catch her." "Stop lying." The elderly woman, Margaret Patterson, a retired school principal, stood up, her phone still recording. "Young lady, I have 20/20 vision and 40 years of experience dealing with dishonest people. You grabbed that child in anger and broke her arm deliberately. The seatbelt sign wasn't even on. There was no turbulence. "I have it all on video," her husband added, his own phone raised. "From 3 different angles. Other passengers are recording too." Janet's face crumpled. She sank to her knees in the aisle, her carefully constructed lie disintegrating. I didn't sleep. 32 hours. I didn't mean to hurt her." "But you did," Thomas said coldly, "and now you're trying to cover it up." Captain Brennan's voice came through the speakers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, after consultation with medical professionals and air traffic control, we've made the decision to continue to Los Angeles. We're 83 minutes out, and the medical facilities there are superior to what we'd find with an emergency diversion. The passenger is stable and receiving care. We ask for your patience and understanding." Sarah wanted to scream, to demand they land immediately, but Dr. Chen touched her shoulder. "He's right. LAX will have pediatric orthopedic trauma surgeons immediately available. A smaller hospital in Denver might not. Your daughter is stable. The splint will prevent further damage." Those 83 minutes were the longest of Sarah Martinez's life. She held Emma, who drifted in and out of awareness, her face pale and sweaty. The pain medication from the plane's medical kit barely took the edge off. Other passengers brought water, tissues, words of comfort and outrage. A flight attendant from business class, horrified by what her colleague had done, brought ice packs to help with the swelling. Meanwhile, Sarah made another call, this time to a lawyer her sister had recommended years ago. "Diane, I need help. My daughter was assaulted by a flight attendant. Her arm is broken. We're still on the plane." Attorney Diane Foster's response was immediate and sharp. "Don't sign anything. Don't accept any offers. Document everything. I'll meet you at the hospital." Janet had been escorted to a crew rest area where she sat with her head in her hands under Marcus's uncomfortable supervision. The career she'd built over 15 years was over. She knew it. But worse than that, far worse, was the image of Emma's face, twisted in agony, that kept replaying in her mind. When Flight 447 finally touched down at LAX, emergency vehicles were waiting on the tarmac. The moment the plane reached the gate, paramedics rushed aboard with a stretcher and proper medical equipment. Emma was carefully transferred, her arm secured in a professional splint. Sarah followed, clutching Emma's backpack and her own purse, her legs barely working. "Cedars-Sinai Medical Center," the lead paramedic told her. "They're expecting you. Pediatric orthopedic team is standing by." As the ambulance screamed through Los Angeles traffic, its sirens wailing, Sarah called David again. This time she could barely speak through her tears. "We're in an ambulance. They're taking her to surgery. David, her arm. It's so bad, that woman she just grabbed her end." David Martinez was already in his car, already driving toward the airport in Atlanta, already making calls to get on the next flight to Los Angeles. His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the tremor beneath it, the barely controlled rage of a father who couldn't protect his child. "I'm coming, Sarah. I'll be there in 5 hours. You tell Emma that Daddy's coming and that everything is going to be okay." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something cold and deadly. "And you tell that airline that they have no idea what's about to hit them." At Cedars-Sinai, Emma was rushed into pre-op. X-rays confirmed Dr. Chen's assessment, a severe displaced fracture requiring immediate open reduction surgery. As the anesthesiologist prepared Emma for surgery, she looked up at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I don't want to fly anymore." Those 6 words shattered Sarah's heart more completely than anything else that had happened. The operating room lights were blindingly bright as Dr. Michael Strauss, one of Cedars-Sinai's top pediatric orthopedic surgeons, examined the X-rays with a deepening frown. Emma lay unconscious on the table, her small body draped in surgical sheets, her broken arm exposed and prepped for surgery. "Whoever did this used significant force," Dr. Strauss said to his surgical team, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This isn't a fall injury. The fracture pattern is consistent with a twisting mechanism. Someone grabbed and wrenched her arm violently. He picked up his instruments. Let's get this child fixed. The surgery took 2 hours and 43 minutes. Dr. Strauss had to make an incision along Emma's forearm, realign both the radius and ulna bones, and insert 2 titanium plates with 8 screws to hold everything in place. The damage was extensive: soft tissue trauma, muscle bruising, and nerve involvement that would require careful monitoring. In the surgical waiting room, Sarah sat motionless, staring at nothing. She'd called her sister, her parents, and David 3 more times. Each call was the same: helpless updates, reassurances she didn't believe herself, and silent prayers that her daughter would be okay. At 6:47 p.m. Pacific Time, the waiting room doors burst open. David Martinez strode through them, still wearing his Atlanticare pilot's uniform. He'd been called in for a last-minute flight when Sarah first called, had immediately gone off-duty citing a family emergency, and had caught the next available flight to Los Angeles. His captain's hat was clutched in one hand, his face was haggard with worry and exhaustion, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "Sarah," he crossed the room in 4 long strides and pulled his wife into his arms. She collapsed against him, finally allowing herself to break down completely. "David, it was so awful," she was screaming, her arm. "I've never seen anything like it. That woman she just grabbed her," and Sarah's words dissolved into sobs. David held her, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. 20 years of maintaining calm in crisis situations, of handling emergencies at 35,000 feet, of never letting emotion cloud his judgment, all of it threatened to crumble. But he forced himself to breathe, to think, to be strong for his family. "Tell me everything, every detail." Sarah recounted the nightmare: the bump against the cart, Janet's explosive rage, the sound of bone breaking, the 83 minutes of hell in the air, and the passengers who'd witnessed it all. David listened, his pilot's mind already cataloging information, analyzing, planning. Dr. Strauss emerged 30 minutes later, still in his surgical scrubs. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, Emma came through surgery very well. Both bones have been repaired and stabilized with plates and screws. She'll need to wear a cast for 8 to 10 weeks, followed by extensive physical therapy." "Will she have full use of her arm?" David's voice was hoarse. "I'm optimistic, but truthfully, we won't know for several months. There was some nerve involvement. Most children recover completely, but she may have some lingering weakness or reduced sensation." Dr. Strauss pulled up the surgical images on a tablet. "This was not a simple break, Mr. Martinez. Someone used considerable force. If you're pursuing legal action, these images and my surgical notes will document the severity." David's hands balled into fists. "We absolutely are." They were allowed into the recovery room where Emma lay sleeping, her left arm encased in a pristine white cast from just below her shoulder to her wrist. She looked so small, so fragile. David sat beside the bed and carefully took her right hand, bringing it to his lips. Tears he'd been holding back finally fell. "Daddy's here, princess," he whispered. "Daddy's here, and I promise you, I swear to you, this will never happen to another child." At 8:15 p.m., a man in an expensive suit appeared at the door of Emma's hospital room. He knocked softly, his expression professionally sympathetic. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, my name is Gerald Hutchins. I'm the Customer Relations Director for Skyward Airlines. I came as soon as I heard about this terrible accident." "Accident?" David stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame suddenly seeming to fill the entire room. "Is that what you're calling it?" Gerald's smile faltered slightly. "A regrettable incident. We take passenger safety very seriously, and we want to make this right." He pulled out a folder. "Skyward Airlines would like to offer a full refund of your tickets, a $5,000 voucher for future travel, and will cover all of Emma's medical expenses." "In exchange for," David's voice was dangerously quiet. Well, we would need you to sign a confidentiality agreement and release of liability. Standard procedure in these situations. We handle everything quietly. Your daughter gets the care she needs, and everyone moves forward. Sarah's mouth fell open in disbelief. You want us to stay quiet about your flight attendant breaking our daughter's arm? Mrs. Martinez, I understand you're emotional, but let's not assign blame prematurely. Our internal investigation. Your internal investigation. David took 3 steps forward, his pilot's training the only thing keeping his hands at his sides. Let me tell you something, Mr. Hutchins. I've been flying commercial aircraft for 20 years. I know every FAA regulation, every safety protocol, every passenger protection law in the books. And what happened to my daughter wasn't an accident. It was an assault. Gerald's professional mask cracked slightly. Mr. Martinez, if we could just discuss this reasonably. David snatched the folder from Gerald's hands and tore it cleanly in half. The papers fluttered to the hospital floor like broken promises. You want reasonable. Here's reasonable. Get out of this hospital room. Get away from my family. And you tell your CEO, your board of directors, and every single executive at Skyward Airlines that Captain David Martinez is coming for them. Gerald's face went pale. Mr. Martinez, I don't think you understand what you're. No, you don't understand. David's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. You just attacked a pilot's daughter. You broke her arm, traumatized her, and now you're trying to buy our silence. I know how airlines work. I know how you bury complaints, how you protect bad employees, how you prioritize profit over safety. But you picked the wrong family to victimize. Gerald backed toward the door, his expensive shoes crunching on the torn papers. You're making a mistake. Fighting us will cost you more than. Get out, David's command voice, the one he used in cockpits during emergencies, made Gerald flinch. The customer relations director fled. Sarah stared at her husband, seeing a side of him she'd never witnessed before. David was always calm, always measured, always diplomatic, but now his eyes burned with something primal and fierce. David, what are we going to do? He looked at his sleeping daughter, at the cast covering her small arm, at the IV lines and monitors that shouldn't be part of any 12-year-old's birthday celebration. Then he pulled out his phone and began making calls to his union representative, to his lawyer friend who specialized in aviation law, to pilot colleagues across the country, and to a journalist he knew at Aviation Today. We're going to war, David said simply. And Skyward Airlines has no idea what they've just unleashed. David Martinez didn't sleep that night. While Sarah dozed fitfully in the chair beside Emma's hospital bed, David sat in the hallway with his laptop, 3 legal pads, and a determination forged from 20 years of crisis management training. By 3 a.m., he'd created a war plan that would have impressed any military strategist. His first call went to James Chen, his union representative at the Allied Pilots Association. James, I need the names of every lawyer who's ever gone after an airline and won. James, groggy but alert, sensed the steel in David's voice. What happened? David explained in clinical detail the facts, the timeline, the witnesses, the injury. When he finished, James was silent for a long moment. Jesus, David, I'm so sorry. Give me 2 hours. I'll have a list and I'll make some calls. Next, David contacted Thomas Garrett, the attorney who'd witnessed the assault. Thomas answered on the second ring. Captain Martinez, I was hoping you'd call. I've already drafted a preliminary witness statement with timestamps and photographic evidence. I have contact information for 4 other first-class passengers who saw everything, and I've reached out to 3 more from business class who heard the commotion. Thank you, David's voice was tight with emotion. Can you recommend legal representation? The best aviation attorney in the country is Rebecca Thornton out of New York. I've already emailed her about your case. She wants to talk to you as soon as possible. By sunrise, David had assembled a team that made Skyward Airlines corporate counsel look like amateurs. Rebecca Thornton, who'd won a landmark $47 million verdict against a major carrier 3 years earlier, agreed to take Emma's case. She was a force of nature, Harvard Law, 20 years specializing in aviation litigation, and a reputation for absolutely destroying airlines that put profits over safety. Captain Martinez, Rebecca's voice was sharp and focused on their 6 a.m. call. I've reviewed the preliminary information Thomas Garrett sent. This isn't just assault and battery. This is a systemic failure. Airlines don't have violent crew members by accident. They create them through impossible working conditions and inadequate oversight. I want to know everything about Janet Walsh, David said. Her employment history, her schedule, any prior complaints. Already on it. I have investigators pulling records as we speak. David's next move was strategic and devastating. He called Marcus Powell, the other flight attendant who'd been working first class on Flight 447. Marcus answered nervously, clearly expecting a threat or confrontation. Marcus, this is Captain David Martinez. I'm not calling to intimidate you. I'm calling because I think you're a good person caught in a bad situation, and I want to give you the chance to tell the truth. There was a long pause. Captain, I don't know what to say. Tell me about Janet's schedule that day. Tell me how long she'd been awake. The floodgates opened. Marcus, guilt-ridden and terrified, revealed everything. Janet had been called in on her day off. She'd already worked a 16-hour shift the day before. The caffeine pills she was taking, the way Skyward routinely pressured crew members to accept last-minute assignments, and the culture of fear that kept people from reporting safety concerns. They'll fire me if they know I talked to you, Marcus whispered. Then we'll protect you, David promised. You're going to be a witness, but we'll do it right. You'll have legal protection. By 8 a.m., Rebecca called back with information that made David's blood boil. Janet Walsh had 3 prior incidents in her file, 3 complaints from passengers about aggressive behavior and inappropriate physical contact. All 3 were quietly settled by Skyward with confidentiality agreements and small payouts. Janet received mandatory anger management counseling, but was never suspended or properly disciplined. They knew, David said, his voice deadly calm. They knew she was dangerous and they kept her flying. It gets worse. I pulled Skyward's crew scheduling records through discovery requests I filed an hour ago. Emergency motion. Judge signed off because of the child victim involved. Janet had logged 93 hours of duty time in the 6 days before your daughter's flight. FAA regulations allow a maximum of 85 hours per month, but Skyward was exploiting loopholes by using different crew bases to spread the hours across multiple records. David's hands trembled with rage. This was exactly what he'd suspected, systemic violations that prioritized cost-cutting over safety. Rebecca, I want to file a complaint with the FAA, the NTSB, and the Department of Transportation. Simultaneously, I want inspectors crawling over every aspect of Skyward's operations. Already drafting them. But David, I need to prepare you. The airline will fight back hard. They'll try to discredit you, claim you're motivated by revenge, maybe even investigate your own flying record looking for anything to use against you. Let them try, David said grimly. My record is spotless. At noon, David made his most public move yet. He walked into the hospital's media center where 3 local news stations had requested interviews about the injured child from Flight 447. The story was already spreading. Passengers had posted on social media, and the video of Emma screaming in pain had started going viral. David sat in front of the cameras, still in his pilot's uniform, and told the truth with devastating clarity. My name is Captain David Martinez. I've been a commercial airline pilot for 20 years with an impeccable safety record. 3 days ago, a Skyward Airlines flight attendant assaulted my 12-year-old daughter in first class, breaking both bones in her forearm. This wasn't an accident. It was a violent attack witnessed by multiple passengers and captured on video. But this isn't just about my daughter. This is about an airline that knowingly kept a dangerous employee flying, that routinely violates crew rest requirements, and that has created a culture where safety comes second to profit. He held up Emma's x-rays to the camera. This is what corporate negligence looks like. These are the plates and screws that will be in my daughter's arm for the rest of her life. And I promise you, I will not rest until Skyward Airlines is held accountable, until every dangerous practice is exposed, and until changes are made that protect every passenger and crew member in American aviation. The interview aired on the evening news and exploded across the internet. Within hours, #Justice for Emma was trending nationally. Other passengers from Flight 447 began posting their videos and accounts. Former Skyward employees started reaching out anonymously with stories of similar incidents, safety violations, and the toxic culture of fear. David's phone rang constantly. News outlets from CNN to the New York Times wanted interviews. His pilot union brothers started organizing. And most importantly, the FAA's Office of Aviation Safety opened a formal investigation into Skyward Airlines. At 9 p.m., David received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a cold, corporate voice spoke. "Captain Martinez, this is Richard Calloway, CEO of Skyward Airlines. I'm calling personally to discuss a resolution." "Mr. Calloway, the only resolution I'm interested in is watching your airline face every consequence it deserves." "Captain, you're making a mistake. We're prepared to offer $2 million. "I don't want your money," David interrupted, his voice like ice. "I want your resignation. I want Janet Walsh prosecuted. I want your safety records open to federal inspection. And I want every pilot, every flight attendant, and every passenger to know that Skyward Airlines values profit over human beings." "You're going to destroy thousands of jobs," Calloway said, anger creeping into his voice. "Our stock price has already dropped 15%. You're hurting innocent employees." "No, Mr. Calloway. You hurt innocent people. You created a system that broke my daughter's arm. You're the one destroying your airline. I'm just making sure the world knows about it." David hung up. He walked back to Emma's room where she was finally awake, her eyes still clouded with pain medication. She looked at her father with such trust, such faith that he would make everything right. "Daddy, are you going to fix this?" David kissed her forehead gently. "Yes, Princess, Daddy's going to fix everything." And he meant it. The video hit 50 million views in 72 hours. Not just one video, dozens of them. Passengers from Flight 447 had uploaded their footage from multiple angles, Emma's scream echoing through the cabin, her arm hanging at that impossible angle, Janet Walsh's face twisted with rage, and then her desperate attempts to lie about turbulence while the seatbelt sign remained dark. The most damning clip came from Margaret Patterson's phone, a clear, unshakable recording of Janet grabbing Emma's arm and violently wrenching it sideways. The #JusticeForEmma dominated Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, but it evolved into something bigger. #Airline Safety Crisis, Protect Passengers, Crew Wellness Matter. What started as outrage over one child's injury became a national conversation about everything broken in commercial aviation. On Capitol Hill, Senator Patricia Donovan of California watched the videos with tears streaming down her face. Her own granddaughter was Emma's age. Within 24 hours, she'd called an emergency hearing of the Senate Commerce Subcommittee on Aviation Safety. "We will get answers," she declared on the Senate floor. "No child, no passenger, should ever fear violence at 35,000 feet. The FAA investigation moved with unprecedented speed. Inspector General Maria Rodriguez personally led a team of 40 investigators who descended on Skyward Airlines headquarters in Phoenix like an avenging army. They seized crew scheduling records, maintenance logs, training documentation, and incident reports going back 5 years. What they found was even worse than David had suspected. Skyward had 127 unreported passenger incidents in the past 18 months alone. Assaults, injuries, medical emergencies that should have triggered FAA review, but were quietly settled with confidentiality agreements and cash payments. Janet Walsh's 3 prior complaints were just the tip of the iceberg. 7 other flight attendants had multiple violent incident reports. 12 pilots had filed internal complaints about being pressured to fly while fatigued. The airline's crew scheduling software had been deliberately programmed to exploit regulatory loopholes, splitting duty hours across different crew bases to hide violations. Rebecca Thornton held a press conference outside Skyward's headquarters, David standing beside her in his uniform. Skyward Airlines didn't just fail Emma Martinez, Rebecca declared, her voice ringing with prosecutorial authority. They failed every passenger who trusted them with their safety. We have documented evidence of systematic fraud, willful negligence, and a corporate culture that treated federal safety regulations as suggestions rather than laws. The airline's stock went into freefall, dropping 43% in 1 week, wiping out $2.3 billion in market value. Major institutional investors started dumping their shares. Credit rating agencies downgraded Skyward's debt to junk status. Travel booking sites showed reservation cancellations spiking by 67%. But the most powerful response came from within the aviation industry itself. Captain Michael Torres, president of the Allied Pilots Association, stood before 3,000 pilots at an emergency union meeting in Dallas. Brothers and sisters, what happened to Captain Martinez's daughter could happen to any of our children. But more than that, the conditions that created Janet Walsh's breakdown exist across this industry. We are all being worked to death. We are all operating in systems designed to maximize profit while minimizing safety margins. The room erupted in applause. Within 48 hours, pilots from Atlantic Air, Continental Express, and Pacific Airways staged coordinated safety inspections at 15 major airports, perfectly legal under union contracts, but resulting in flight delays that brought attention to systemic issues. They weren't striking. They were meticulously following every single safety regulation that airlines routinely pressured them to shortcut. Flight attendants joined them. The Association of Flight Attendants released a stunning statement. Janet Walsh's actions were indefensible, but they were also predictable. We have been warning airlines for years that impossible schedules, inadequate rest, and absence of mental health support would lead to tragedy. Emma Martinez paid the price for corporate greed. Anonymous Skyward employees began leaking documents to the media. Internal emails where executives discussed managing crew costs by exploiting scheduling loopholes, presentations showing deliberate understaffing strategies, and perhaps most damning, a memo from 18 months earlier warning that crew stress levels present a significant safety risk. That was ignored. Celebrity activists amplified Emma's story. Taylor Swift donated $100,000 to a passenger safety advocacy fund created in Emma's name. LeBron James tweeted the video with the caption, "This is someone's baby. This is unacceptable." Oprah dedicated an entire episode to airline safety, interviewing David and Sarah while Emma watched from home, her cast covered in supportive messages from strangers worldwide. In Emma's hospital room, she'd been transferred to a private recovery facility. The cards and gifts piled up until they filled 3 rooms. Letters from children, parents, pilots, flight attendants, and passengers who'd experienced their own airline nightmares but never had the platform or resources to fight back. Emma, still processing her trauma, read some of them with tears in her eyes. One letter was from a flight attendant named Maria. "Dear Emma, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I want you to know that most of us would never hurt a child. But I also want you to know that I worked 36 hours straight last month because my airline threatened to fire me if I refused. I was so tired I hallucinated. Your story might save my life and the lives of my passengers. Thank you for being brave." Emma looked up at her father. "Daddy," she says, "I'm brave, but I'm not. I'm scared all the time now." David sat beside her, his heart breaking. "Princess, brave doesn't mean not being scared. Brave means being scared and still standing up. And you're doing that just by healing and telling your truth." The therapist they'd hired, Dr. Linda Freeman, who specialized in childhood trauma, visited 3 times a week. She explained that Emma's fear of flying, her nightmares, and her anxiety around strangers were normal responses to assault. Recovery would take time, possibly years. The physical arm would heal faster than the emotional wounds. Meanwhile, the legal machinery ground forward with devastating efficiency. Rebecca Thornton filed a $50 million lawsuit against Skyward Airlines, citing negligence, assault, emotional distress, and systemic safety violations. But more importantly, she filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of 847 passengers who'd flown Skyward in the past 2 years and experienced undisclosed safety incidents. The Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation into Skyward's executives for falsifying federal safety records. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation into whether the airline had defrauded investors by concealing safety issues. State attorneys general from 12 states piled on with consumer protection violations. Congress moved with rare bipartisan urgency. Senator Donovan introduced the Aviation Crew Wellness and Passenger Protection Act, immediately dubbed Emma's Law by the media. It mandated strict duty hour limits, required mental health screening and support for crew members, established a confidential safety reporting system, and created severe penalties for airlines that retaliated against employees who reported safety concerns. The bill had 67 Senate co-sponsors within a week. Richard Callaway, Skyward's CEO, resigned under pressure. So did the COO, the Chief of Operations, and the Head of Human Resources. The Board of Directors hired a crisis management firm and a new CEO, a former FAA administrator with an impeccable reputation, tasked with saving the airline from complete collapse. But David Martinez wasn't satisfied. Not yet. "They're still flying," he told Rebecca during a strategy call. "Every day those planes take off, they're putting people at risk." Rebecca smiled grimly. "Not for much longer. The FAA is preparing something unprecedented." She was right. The FAA's announcement came at 6 a.m. Eastern Time on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Administrator Jennifer Cross in a press conference that interrupted regular programming on every major network. After a comprehensive investigation into Skyward Airlines' operations, safety protocols, and regulatory compliance, the Federal Aviation Administration is issuing an emergency order of suspension. Her voice was steady, but her expression was granite. Effective immediately, Skyward Airlines is prohibited from operating 63% of its routes, pending mandatory safety recertification. Additionally, all crew members must undergo comprehensive retraining before returning to service. This is the most extensive emergency grounding action taken against a major carrier in 40 years. The aviation world stopped breathing. Administrator Cross continued, displaying damning statistics on screens behind her. "Our investigation revealed 342 violations of crew duty time regulations, systematic falsification of safety records, inadequate incident reporting mechanisms, and a corporate culture that prioritized profit margins over passenger safety." The incident involving 12-year-old Emma Martinez was not an isolated tragedy. It was the inevitable result of systemic failure. At Skyward's operations center in Phoenix, chaos erupted. Dispatchers frantically rerouted aircraft. Customer service lines were overwhelmed with hundreds of thousands of calls. The airline's app crashed from traffic as passengers desperately tried to rebook. Airports from Boston to San Diego saw massive lines of stranded travelers, many holding signs that read, "We stand with Emma," and refusing Skyward vouchers. The financial impact was apocalyptic. Skyward's stock plummeted another 31% before trading was halted. The airline's market capitalization had evaporated from $8.4 billion to $2.1 billion in less than 2 weeks. Credit lines were frozen. Aircraft leasing companies began repossession proceedings. Industry analysts predicted bankruptcy within 90 days. David watched the press conference from his living room in Atlanta, Emma curled beside him on the couch with her casted arm resting on a pillow. Sarah stood behind them, her hands on David's shoulders. When Administrator Cross finished, David felt something he hadn't experienced since that horrible phone call, a sense of justice beginning to take shape. "Daddy, does this mean other kids won't get hurt?" Emma asked quietly. "Yes, Princess, that's exactly what it means." But the reckoning wasn't finished. That same morning, in a Los Angeles courtroom, Janet Walsh stood before Judge Raymond Martinez, no relation to David's family, but the coincidence wasn't lost on anyone. Janet had aged a decade in 2 weeks. Her attorney had negotiated a plea agreement: 3 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, mandatory psychiatric treatment, and permanent prohibition from working in any passenger-facing aviation role. "Ms. Walsh," Judge Martinez said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "you had a 15-year career without major incident, but your actions on Flight 447 were inexcusable. You assaulted a child who trusted you to keep her safe." Janet's voice broke as she spoke. "Your Honor, I know I can never undo what I did. I see Emma's face every time I close my eyes. I hear her scream. I destroyed her birthday, her sense of safety, and nearly destroyed her arm permanently." Tears streamed down her face. "But I want people to know, I'm not making excuses. The airline industry is breaking people. I was on hour 32 of being awake. I'd taken 6 caffeine pills. I had begged my supervisor to let me rest, and she threatened to fire me. I became someone I don't recognize." The judge listened, then delivered his sentence with the plea agreement. But he added something unexpected. "Ms. Walsh, I'm also ordering you to participate in a new FAA advisory committee on crew mental health. Your experience, however tragic, can help prevent future incidents." David and Sarah watched via live stream. Part of David wanted harsher punishment, but another part, the part that had learned about the systemic failures, recognized that Janet was both perpetrator and victim. The airline had created a monster, then unleashed it on passengers. The industry-wide reforms moved with stunning speed. Emma's law passed the Senate 94-6 and the House 412-18. President signed it into law in a rose garden ceremony, with David, Sarah, and Emma standing beside her. Emma's cast was now covered in signatures, including those of senators, pilots, and flight attendants who'd fought for change. The law mandated maximum duty hours, no more than 60 hours per week, 80 hours per 2 weeks. Mandatory mental health screening every 6 months for all crew members. Confidential safety reporting systems with whistleblower protection. Severe criminal penalties for executives who falsified safety records. Required crew rest facilities at major airports. Passenger Bill of Rights strengthening assault protections. Airlines across America scrambled to comply. The cost was estimated at $4.7 billion industry-wide annually, but the alternative, losing passenger trust and facing FAA grounding, was unthinkable. Rebecca Thornton's lawsuit moved toward resolution. Skyward's new leadership, desperate to survive, offered a settlement: $8.7 million to Emma, public admission of systemic failures, an agreement to implement reforms exceeding federal minimums. They also established a $50 million fund for the class action passengers who'd experienced unreported incidents. "Take it," Rebecca advised during a family meeting. "You've already won everything that matters. The airline is on its knees. The industry is reformed. Now let Emma heal without years of litigation trauma." David looked at his daughter. "Princess, what do you think?" Emma, now 13 years old after her birthday had passed during the nightmare, thought carefully. Will the money help other kids be safe? The reforms will help everyone be safe, David explained. The money is for you, for college, for your future, for anything you need. Then okay, Emma said. But I want some of it to go to flight attendants who need mental health help, like Ms. Walsh needed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's compassion. Even after everything, Emma could see the humanity in her attacker. The settlement was finalized in October. Skyward Airlines began the long process of recertification, with 73 aircraft still grounded. The airline's survival remained uncertain, but David didn't care about that anymore. He cared that 847 million passengers flying annually in the United States would be safer because his daughter had suffered. On a crisp November morning, David received a call from Administrator Cross. Captain Martinez, I want to personally thank you. Your actions, your refusal to stay quiet, your meticulous documentation, your courage in going public, they didn't just help your daughter. You changed an entire industry. I just did what any father would do, David replied. No, she said firmly. Most fathers would have taken the money and signed the confidentiality agreement. You chose justice over comfort. You chose systemic change over personal settlement. That's rare, Captain. That's heroic. After the call, David sat in Emma's room watching her sleep. The cast had finally been removed the week before. Her arm bore surgical scars, thin white lines that would fade but never completely disappear. She'd regained 90% of her strength and mobility. The physical therapy continued, but Dr. Strauss was optimistic about full recovery. The emotional recovery was slower. Emma still had nightmares. She still tensed around strangers in uniform, but Dr. Freeman said she was making remarkable progress. And something unexpected had happened. Emma had started talking about flying again. 9 months after the incident, Emma Martinez stood at Gate 23 of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, her hand trembling as she gripped her boarding pass. The scars on her left arm, now visible in short sleeves, caught the fluorescent light, thin white lines that told a story of survival and transformation. I don't know if I can do this, Emma whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. Sarah squeezed her daughter's shoulder gently. We can turn around right now, sweetheart. No one will think less of you. But David knelt in front of Emma, his captain's uniform crisp and commanding, his eyes soft with understanding. Princess, you don't have to be brave today. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But I want you to know something. That plane is the safest it's ever been because of you. Every crew member on board has completed the new wellness program. Every safety protocol has been strengthened. You did that. Emma looked toward the jet bridge, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. For months, she'd been trapped in nightmares, reliving the crack of bone, the explosion of pain, Janet's twisted face. Dr. Freeman had warned that the first flight would be the hardest, that PTSD didn't vanish just because time passed. But something had changed in recent weeks. Emma had started watching aviation documentaries again. She'd asked David to explain how pilots handled emergencies. She'd even attended a Future Aviators event at a local flight school, where she'd sat in a flight simulator and felt that old spark of wonder reignite. I want to try, Emma said finally, her voice stronger. I want to fly. The gate agent, a woman named Patricia who'd read Emma's story, recognized them immediately. Her eyes welled with tears. Miss Martinez, it's an honor to have you flying with us today. We've prepared something special. They boarded early before other passengers. The captain, a woman in her 50s named Michelle Rodriguez, emerged from the cockpit and approached Emma with a warm smile. Emma Martinez, I'm Captain Rodriguez. I've been flying for 28 years, and I want you to know that everything we do today is designed to keep you safe. Would you like to see the cockpit? Emma's eyes widened. She looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. Together, they stepped into the cockpit. that sacred space Emma had dreamed about since childhood. The instrumentation gleamed, switches and dials and screens creating a symphony of technology and precision. "This is where the magic happens," Captain Rodriguez said. "Every switch, every procedure, every checklist, it's all about bringing people home safely, just like your dad does every single day." She handed Emma a pair of captain's wings. "You earned these, not by flying a plane but by making flying safer for everyone." Emma pinned the wings to her shirt, her fingers brushing against the scars on her arm. Symbols of pain and symbols of hope, side by side. The flight was unremarkable, which made it perfect. Emma sat between her parents, her breathing measured through the techniques Dr. Freeman had taught her. During turbulence, Sarah held her hand. When the flight attendant approached with the beverage cart, Emma flinched but didn't panic. The attendant, a young man named Chris, moved slowly, spoke gently, and gave Emma extra space. "You're doing amazing," David whispered as they cruised over Tennessee. When the plane landed smoothly in Miami for their family vacation, Emma realized she'd done it. She'd faced her fear and survived. The old Emma, the one who'd boarded Flight 447 with such innocent joy, was gone. But a new Emma was emerging, scarred but stronger, fearful but determined, wounded but healing. The vacation was therapeutic. They swam in the ocean, built sandcastles, and didn't talk about lawsuits or testimonies or congressional hearings. Emma laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. The sound made Sarah cry with relief. On their last evening in Miami, David received an unexpected visitor at their hotel. Janet Walsh stood in the lobby, older and haunted, accompanied by her therapist. She'd sent a letter weeks earlier asking if she could apologize in person. After long discussions with Dr. Freeman, the Martinez family had agreed. They met in a private conference room. Janet's hands shook as she looked at Emma. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she began, her voice cracking. "What I did was unforgivable. I broke your arm and your trust and your joy. I took something from you that you may never fully get back." Emma sat quietly, her parents flanking her protectively. She'd written down what she wanted to say, and now she read from the paper with a steady voice. "Ms. Walsh, what you did hurt me in ways I'm still understanding. I have nightmares. I'm scared of things I was never scared of before. But I also learned something: hurt people hurt people. The airline hurt you first and you hurt me. I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm saying I understand a little bit." Janet sobbed. "You're a better person than I deserve to meet." "My therapist says holding on to hate hurts me more than it hurts you," Emma continued. "So I'm trying to let it go, not for you, for me. But I also want you to know that I hope you get help. I hope you heal too." The meeting lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, Janet hugged Emma, with permission, carefully, briefly, and whispered, "Thank you for your mercy." After she left, David held his daughter close. "I'm so proud of you, Princess. What you just did took more courage than anything I've ever done." 3 months later, Emma attended the official opening of the Aviation Crew Wellness Center in Chicago, the first of 12 facilities nationwide funded by Emma's law. She cut the ribbon alongside Captain Rodriguez, Senator Donovan, and Administrator Cross. Flight attendants and pilots who'd been struggling with mental health issues lined up to thank her personally. "You saved my life," one pilot told Emma, tears in his eyes. "I was ready to quit because I couldn't handle the stress anymore. Now I have access to counseling and reasonable schedules. My family has me back." At 14, Emma started flight training in a small Cessna with an instructor her father trusted completely. The first time she took the controls and felt the plane respond to her touch, she experienced something transcendent, not the loss of her innocence, but the birth of her purpose. "Daddy, I'm still going to be a pilot," Emma declared after her third lesson, her face radiant with determination. "Not despite what happened, but because of it. I'm going to be the kind of pilot who makes sure everyone feels safe." David watched his daughter, scarred, traumatized, but unbroken, and realized that some fractures heal stronger than the original bone. Emma Martinez had been broken at 35,000 feet, but in the breaking and healing, she discovered something unshakable: the power of one person's courage to change the world. The aviation industry would never forget Emma Martinez. New pilots studied her case in safety courses. Flight attendants learned about the importance of wellness programs through her story. And millions of passengers flew safer because a 12-year-old girl and her father had refused to stay silent. On Emma's 15th birthday, she received a letter from a 7-year-old girl who was taking her first flight. "Dear Emma," it read in careful block letters, "my mommy says flying is safe now because of you. Thank you for being brave. When I grow up, I want to be a pilot just like you." Emma put the letter in a special folder she kept, filled with hundreds of similar messages. Then she looked at her father and smiled. "Ready for our flight lesson, Dad?" "Always, Princess, always." As father and daughter drove to the airfield together, the sun breaking through clouds like heaven's approval, Emma understood something profound. She hadn't just survived trauma. She transformed it into purpose. Her broken arm had helped heal a broken system. And in the end, that was the greatest flight of all. The end.